women from the small village of Koktoum in northern Laos have spontaneously burst into song following a meal as part of the celebrations for the opening of a new 68-bed dormitory for their village school. But their joy and enthusiasm, and above all their obvious sisterhood, also presents a vibrant and fitting introduction to what follows. Trish Clark's journey of exploration and discovery of the beauty and art of Lao weaving and embroidery, and of an ambitious plan to save these important talents, women's talents, from being lost.
Like scores of Western women before me, over the past few years of coming and going to and from Laos on various projects, on many occasions I've often been in awe of the intricate beauty of the weaving and embroidery of village women in Laos. But it really all began for me in the village of Pujong back in 2014 when I met Nguyen Sai Chow, the young wife of the sole school teacher in Pujong. Sitting outside their extremely basic dirt-floored hut, she has somehow managed to create examples of the most striking museum-quality embroidery one could imagine.
It was as a result of these early meetings and further research that Trish became aware that this young woman's art and that of previous generations of Lao women was under threat. And she made it her mission to not only find out more about these ethnic arts, but to do something about saving them from oblivion. Hello, I'm Amanda Keller, and although I've not been directly involved in this project of Trish's, I've known her for more than 30 years. So when she asked if I'd sort of host this story about her journey of discovery, I jumped at the chance. Trish is quick to point out that she feels this can only be a layperson's or an amateur's approach to a story about fabrics and textiles, weaving and embroidery. It's a surprisingly complex subject, and as she insists, she's no expert. And it's made even more convoluted by the fact that there are some 49 different ethnic groups in Laos, many with their own distinctive brand of intricate weaving or embroidery. Just impossible to cover it all. So what we're doing here is just telling the story of a few exploratory journeys of an ordinary Australian woman. Actually two, because photographer and video editor Julie West joins Trish as she travels to several widely separated Lao villages of different ethnicities for a sampling of some of their incredible work and to get a sense of the satisfaction, the creativity and the deep spirituality that motivates these women. So first off, let's just look at where we're talking about. Laos is right in the middle of Southeast Asia. It's completely landlocked, surrounded by 5 countries: Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar and China. With only 6 million people, Laos is the smallest and poorest country in the region. Trish and Julie's road journeys, with the ancient capital of Luang Prabang as a base, are mainly in the north. But they cover a couple of thousand kilometres and some 10 different ethnic groups. In 2015, Trish and her husband Ian Finlay raised funds in Australia to replace the old decrepit hut that served as a school in the village of Pujong with a solid new concrete school.
During that time, and in the few years since then, Ian and I have made many trips back and forth to Laos and of course to Pujong village in all sorts of weather, always accompanied by our English-speaking friend Chanti Sisambut, who is inseparable from his iPhone. Throughout these visits, Meren Nguyen and I continued to nurture a growing friendship. In the back of my mind, I had a vague ambition of bringing some of her dazzling work into the light to gain some recognition of her talents.
This one.
Trish bought her a big book brimming with photographs, simply titled The Ao Mien, the ethnic group to which Meren Nguyen belongs. It's in English, so there's no way she could read it, but the pictures of her people and their art, their weaving, their embroidery, proved to be a language that she understood, and she loved it. There are around 20,000 Ao Mien people living in Laos, many relocated to areas with extremely poor facilities, lacking such basics as electricity and roads. They are outsiders, clinging to the very bottom of the social ladder. They're generally held in low regard by their Lao compatriots, largely because they assisted American forces during the war in Indochina, but also in part because they practice non-Buddhist rites. They are animists. That is, they believe spirits live in and animate the trees, the rocks, the very earth around us. They have no written language, but they celebrate a wondrous creation myth in which a dragon dog called Pan Huong and a beautiful princess create the first human ancestors of the Yao nation.
Meren Nguyen showed me how pieces she was currently working on would be made into a pair of trousers to be worn at Yao New Year, generally around January, and also on other ceremonial occasions. She then showed me something I thought was incredible, a pair of trousers she'd already made for her daughter and herself.
When you see the detail of that, and then you realise that Meren Nguyen embroiders that from this side and turns it into this. It's singing, absolutely singing. Stunning.
I asked if she could put them on, as well as the traditional clothing and turban that are worn. Then we all waited outside while she went in and changed to reappear a few minutes later in full traditional Ao Mien splendour. The red fur-like shawl collar, embroidered panels at the back, and on the turban headdress, and of course the fantastical trousers. A little later, after she had changed her clothes again, I asked through Chanti, and off the top of my head, without really knowing where it would lead, a rather fateful question. What I'd really like to do is to make a little learning place for people, a school, where you would teach. What do you think?
We'll come back to that question, Meren Nguyen's answer and the vital repercussions a little later. But in the meantime, let's start on Trish and Julie's journeys. Luang Prabang, the iconic World Heritage town of more than 30 Buddhist temples and some 3,000 monks and novices, is the tourist mecca of Laos. And it's here, in the night market, that you get your first hint of the depth of artistic talent encompassed in Lao culture. The market is huge, but these works by the Hmong embroiderers is a good place to start. The Hmong are one of the most widely spread ethnic groupings in Asia. Migrating over hundreds of years from southern China, they've settled initially in the mountains, right across northern Vietnam, Laos, Thailand and Myanmar. And Shou is one young Hmong woman determined to preserve their art and culture.
They will wear these traditional clothes. If it's not New Year, they will not wear. And this is made only as an everyday. This is also Hmong people made from the wax also. Yes.
She's opened a shop on the main street, showcasing both old and new aspects of Hmong textile art. Trish and Julie visit the store to capture some of the beauty and enormous variety of clothing and decorative materials that have been created by her people. For the occasion, Shou has dressed in traditional Hmong clothing. She explains how the embroidery she learned as a child is incorporated into her clothes.
And this is what I learned, how to do this kind of embroidery. So that's right what I'm saying, that I don't know how to do like the batik. So this is like what we are making.
Now, is this your black Hmong?
Yes, this is the black Hmong traditional belt. So for a black Hmong girl, when we grow up, we have to learn how to do this kind of embroidery. Yes, it is complicated. So this is a typical one.
Yes.
You can tell the embroidery is really, you can feel them.
It's dense.
Yes.
And raised.
Yes.
Yes.
Especially like this one.
Yes. And how long would that take?
This one here, for like a 12 months, we can make maximum just 2 belts. Yes.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Shou.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
In another part of town, just across the Khan River, Trish and Julie, accompanied by Chanti, make a couple of visits to 2 young Katu sisters, Monet and Doi, from the southern Lao province of Sekong. They've come to Luang Prabang to try to improve their financial opportunities, and they found a way of doing it by teaching visiting foreigners the Katu people's special form of weaving, using a backstrap loom. It's an ancient art they're practicing, and Trish and Julie find them sitting on the floor of their rented room with one end of the small looms fixed behind their backs, using their feet to provide the tension. They could just as easily use a tree or the stilts of a house, but the most important aspect of this form of loom is that it's mobile. It can be rolled up, stored, or if necessary, carried when crossing mountain passes.
The most distinctive and recognisable aspect of Katu weaving is the use of beads, or in many cases seeds, often from Job's tears, an essential ingredient in the distinctive flavour of beer Lao, the country's most famous beverage. From such simple and basic equipment, plus imagination and hours of labour of course, they've produced a range of simply beautiful fabrics and fashion wear.
For 23-year-old Dakeo Saya Savan, this classic form of embroidery called Sinlapa Pak Din is what helps offset her and her mother's reliance on financial support from relatives after their own family unit came apart at the seams. Dakeo learnt the craft, which simply means wiggle needlepoint art, on a 3-month course run by the Lao Women's Union. They provide her with gold and silver thread, plus coloured beads for eyes, as well as the tissue templates that she follows for the designs.
It's a throwback to pre-communist days, when, for Laos' class system topped by the royal family, such displays of wealth and privilege were signs of status and power. In an odd twist, the style has come back now as decorative bands for special male and female clothing for weddings, religious and even political events. Dokyo says she can only work for 3 or 4 hours at a time because her eyes become too tired to focus. She will spend probably 3 weeks and maybe 50 hours on each job, for which she will receive about $35.
Dakayo's mother, Phuan, although Buddhist, does small-scale embroidering on piecework rates for Hmong middle women. She earns a few cents a square for storyboard pieces that come to her already drawn on the fabric that she oversews with coloured thread. Her Hmong employer collects them on a regular basis and has them sewn into larger storyboards that are sold at Luang Praban's night market as wall hangings, cushion or bed covers. On the outskirts of Luang Prabang, a unique school operated by the Catholic Church with funds from the Vatican teaches young women to weave. What's unique about this is that all the students are deaf-mute. They work on about a dozen big floor looms under the main building.
20-year-old Muang is one of the most determined weavers because she is planning to make a future living from it. Deaf and mute since birth, the boarding school and shop have been essential for her, as the Lao government provides no social services for anyone, so without the support of family or friends, the school is a real lifeline for her.
The weaving work produced by Muang and the other deaf women is also sold in a small shop operated by the school. There are some 200 male and female students of mixed ethnicities who also operate a small farm to help pay the school's operating costs by producing mushrooms. These are sold at the daily morning market. Several hundred kilometres to the southeast of Luang Prabang is Jiangkwang province. Trish and Julie set out to visit a number of remote villages of Tai Phuan, Tai Dam and Hmong people. But also a mulberry farm, a centre where beautiful silks are created through every stage, from the mulberry bushes, the silkworms, to the making of the thread, dyeing and the embroidery of the fabrics. Jiangkwang province and the prehistoric plain of jars became a prime focus of the so-called secret war in Southeast Asia. While Vietnam and the United States were embroiled in conflict in the 1960s and 70s, Laos was supposedly neutral, yet it received more American bombs than Germany and Japan combined during World War II. UXOs, or unexploded ordnance, that's bombs, still claim lives and some 300 casualties every year, 40 years after the end of the war.
One particularly gruesome reminder of those terrible days, and now the site of a memorial and a museum, is Tampu Cave on the edge of the Plain of Jars. Almost 300 men, women and children lived in here and sheltered during bombing raids, until one American fighter bomber directed a single rocket into the mouth of the cave, incinerating everyone inside within a nanosecond.
The inhabitants of Ban Ta, a Tai Phuan Buddhist ethnic grouping, live with the constant danger of UXOs as their village lies along part of what was the former Ho Chi Minh Trail. Ban Ta means meeting place, and it's the central focus for a network of even smaller villages in the surrounding area, which even now has not been completely cleared of bombs. The village has a primary and a secondary school, But the main, well, virtually the only business of the village is rice.
The women are all rice farmers and use any time they can squeeze out from their daily routine lives to sit at handmade floor looms set up inside or outside underneath their simple homes to weave complex patterned Lao skirts called sins.
If they are nimble, conscientious workers, they can perhaps weave one a week that they can then sell for around $10 to a middlewoman who collects them up to sell at a tiny increase in the weekly market held at the main township of Phan Savan. The weavers use the extra monies to pay for a child's small education costs, hospital visits or medicine. Getting to Jiangku village proved a bit of a challenge. The local river was up and passable, only just in a farming vehicle, a tok-tok. But they had second thoughts about taking the car across, so the next best solution was a small suspension bridge nearby. Jiangku is in an area that also experienced heavy bombing and continues to struggle with the horrendous ongoing after effects.
But there we met Assistant Village Chief Tien, a Thai Dam woman. She radiated strength and intelligence and fluidly articulated the importance of weaving to the women of her ethnicity. It reminds us of who and what we are, she said. There is a danger that we will forget that. We need to boost women by praising their skills.
There are an estimated 26,000 Thai Dam people in Laos. As with the other ethnicities, they too came originally from China and became involved in other people's colonial and political wars. They have their own spoken language and also a written alphabet based on Sanskrit. Additionally, they have their own very particular birth, marriage, life and death rituals in which ancestors and spirits are worshipped down the generations. Ceremonial, spiritual and traditional stories are captured in their weavings that are frequently embellished with over-embroidering. Jiangku village has a community centre where on the upstairs floor, Diane shows us her traditional headwear. A woven and embroidered length of material simply folded into place on her head, like a turban.
Yes. You see?
There's also a small collection of artefacts and weavings. Among them, a blanket for a boy's bed covering that includes in its design a sprinkling of stars, so that when he sleeps at night, Diane explains, he can ride the heavens.
That's the star. This is the travelling star I've heard about. So you dream. If you sleep under this, you dream about travelling in the stars.
Still in Thai Dam territory, Diane suggests we visit a nearby handicraft centre run by Mrs. Boon Mi, whom we'd met with Diane at Jiangku village. It's mainly a centre of weaving, where local women create their works, which Boon Mi sells for them through the market at Phan Savan.
One astounding piece, not for sale, placed high on a wall, grabbed our attention. It was a woven representation of the horror-filled event at Tampur Cave some 40 years previously. A piece of 20th century history captured on a weaver's loom.
Laos still remains somewhat of a secret place, as Trish and Julie found out trying to meet up with Hmong master embroiderer Demua. Her village, Ban Nasala, also lies in hilly country on part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. When they eventually found their way to the village with local English-speaking guide Vilam Petrasi and Chanti, her mother informed them that her daughter was deaf-mute and would not be available.
Coming back unannounced a day or so later, we find Demua there, perfectly sound in hearing and speech, and only too willing to show us not only some of her embroidery, but also to give a full dress display of a new and highly complex embroidered sin, plus head and neck jewellery, that she will wear at the soon-to-be celebrated Hmong New Year.
Friends and family of all ages, including her reluctant mother, enjoy the spectacle, and Demua clearly enjoys the moment. She's unmarried, which in Laos is unusual for a woman of her age, and so she is subject to a lot of good-humoured joshing about hoping that her homemade finery, and indeed it is fine work, will this year attract a suitable husband. The following week, after returning to Luang Prabang, Trish and Julie take off, heading to the northwestern provinces of Udom Jai and Luang Namta. At the small settlement of Muang Beng, they have arranged through contacts in Luang Prabang to meet a Thai Liu woman, Kam Den, who operates a sort of local women's business at a grassroots level. They're invited to share a family evening meal. It's eaten in a room that faces straight out onto the main north-south road that carries the constant and noisy traffic of big trucks to and from neighbouring China.
The next morning, Kam Den shows us some impressive weaving by one of her village friends, and she tells me, with a tinge of sadness, that she has not been able to pass this skill on to her own daughters because she sent them away to stay with friends and relatives in Luang Prabang when they started at high school, thinking that they should get a decent education first. But now they're not interested in weaving or embroidery.
Kam Den then takes them several kilometres to a tiny Kamu village where she's operated a small business for 13 years. They stop on the way to clamber up a hill to collect some of the tropical kudzu vines, from which her team of women create handle bags. At the village, they're greeted by women who are keen to show how they go about their work, using a unique method which looks like a cross between crochet and knitting. First, they strip the outer covering from the vine and roll the revealed innards using their hands and legs to create long strings of colourless flesh that's then air-dried. The strings may be dyed using local flowers, bark and herbs, and are then dexterously woven by hand using complex designs. All of this has been handed down and taught across generations of women. Depending on the designs and size, each bag takes a minimum of 3 days to produce. The bags are reusable, biodegradable, organic. They require no cultivation and no artificial manufacturing process.
These surprisingly sturdy and extremely flexible containers are a part of the fabric of life in the villages. Using the bag's long strap handle across the forehead, women can carry farm produce or almost anything while leaving their hands free to manage their children.
Kam Den pays the women for their work, and the bags are on-sold to outlets in Luang Prabang and Vientiane. The money the village women earn is used in almost all instances to pay for educational necessities for their children. 93-year-old Kiem has been supplementing her meagre farming income in this way for decades. Now almost totally blind, she continues to create bags and enjoy the social interaction that's such a large part of the creation process. Moving on from the jungle vine village, Trish and Julie head further northwest to Luang Namta province, next to China's southern border. Like most of northern Laos, it's rugged and mountainous country, but here even more so. Huge Chinese trucks carrying produce back and forth to the hungry markets of the north make driving particularly hazardous. And when one of them turns over, spilling its load, the mountain road is hopelessly blocked. After several hours, everybody is on their way again, eventually passing the cause of the roadblock, hundreds of boxes of bananas, being optimistically stacked for a second try at getting them to China. Across the provincial border into Luang Namta province, they are led to a sort of tripartite village called Namban Nan, where three different ethnicities, Tai Liu, Tai Dam and Tai Deng, live in apparent harmony.
For outsiders like us, it's hard to spot the difference, but there are deep veins of separateness intricately woven into their lives. Guided by a friend of Chanti's, Nguyen, we are privileged to see some of these differences.
It seems Mr. Nguyen is shortly marrying one of the young village women, and this is the future mother-in-law, Ms. Jom. Ms. Jom is the woman in charge of a village cooperative, through which she organises payment of a daily rate for many of the village women who sit at the big looms, usually under their houses, and duly produce complex patterned materials.
Some of them are specifically ordered designs that will be incorporated into the Sin long skirt format to be worn at weddings or other important events. Others are simply illustrations of animals, mythical or real, while some tell stories that spring straight out of the imagination into the weft and warp. Differing ethnicities often unfold alternate creation myths, and each one is a song of praise to its creator's individual culture.
Miss Jom manages this small but important collective, taking the woven pieces to the weekly market, selling them, taking a small cut for her management skills, and distributing the rest among the weavers. Driver Boon Tang sticks a good luck flower on the number plate. He's not looking forward to the drive back to Luang Prabang, over 300 kilometres through the same mountainous territory, again fraught with dangerous possibilities as a result of Chinese truck traffic. And it's impossible to avoid the other massive Chinese activity in the valleys below. China is building a state-of-the-art high-speed freight and passenger rail system, north-south 418 kilometres through Laos, connecting southern China to Bangkok in Thailand and on to Singapore. Looking down into the valleys, they can see the roadwork, which will include 53 tunnels and 167 bridges, with a planned completion date of 2020. It's huge, and it will have a dramatic impact on Laos, which till now has never had a railroad. The relative isolation of being landlocked will be gone. There'll be other problems, of course, but hopefully the overall result will be positive. The need for change and progress could hardly be more stark than one other site along the same road.
These young Lao women, most likely of Khmer ethnicity, are trudging home after an 8-hour day working in the paddy. They carry on their backs firewood they have collected in the forest in the late afternoon and will use to light an open cooking fire for the family. This is not a one-off event. It is what they do most evenings and will do every evening until eventually they become physically unable, and their own daughters take over where they leave off.
The average lifespan for women in Laos remains obstinately low at 63. For men, it's 59. The death rates in childbirth are grotesquely high, as are infant mortality figures. A sign of hope, and coincidentally highly relevant to Trish and Julie's mission, causes them to jam on the brakes and jump out of the car. A woman is squatting on a small stool outside her simple bamboo-walled hut, embroidering a long panel of material. The hut is perched high above a small river and literally on the edge of the road, with huge trucks passing within metres of where she's sitting.
We piled out of the car and went across to introduce ourselves and politely asked if we could take some photographs and talk about what she was doing. Mrs. Kai, through Chanti we learnt that was her name, nodded in agreement and talked in response to our questions, but never for a moment stopped working. She has 4 children, all at primary school. She is a rice farmer, but this is November, a month when there is a small window of time after the paddy is prepared but the new seedlings not yet planted, in which other work can be undertaken.
At various intervals, the Women's Union visit to deliver a strip of fabric like this, to which Mrs. Kai has tacked their pre-drawn stencil design. She sits outside on the edge of the road to get the best light. It will take her 27 days, she says, working 6 to 8 hours a day, to embroider this piece that will eventually be sewn to the hem of a silk sin and worn at a special occasion. When the representative of the Women's Union collects the strip of completed embroidery, she will pay Ms. Kai 700,000 kip, the equivalent of US $90 or a little over $3 a day. Not much, you might say, but better than working in the rice paddies or on a building site for less.
And as if we needed reminding, at the end of our road journey, as we approached Luang Prabang, the hoardings and promotional material for the Chinese railway left us in no doubt that it was coming. And now, back to that question I asked Mary Nguyen through Chanti earlier on.
Really like to do is to make a little learning place for people, a school where you would teach. What do you think?
Yes, he said, yes.
Mary Nguyen's positive response gave a huge boost to an idea that Trish had been working on, that perhaps it'd be possible to set up a trial residential textile art school on a small scale in the area. She felt it could be done if a suitable house for rent could be found somewhere reasonably near the villages that she and Ian had become familiar with over the past several years. Chanti was tasked with looking around the district centre of Muang Nan, and within days found a recently vacated 2-storey shop house in Samoon Koon village on a back street of Muang Nan district centre. With funds already donated towards the women's business project, the decision was made to rent the building for a year. It could be set up as a potential boarding school for 8 students and 4 teachers, Trish thought, giving classes over 2 16-week semesters a year in embroidery and weaving. Work then got underway to clean the place up, to paint it inside and out, and importantly to knock down a wall and put up a new one on the 2nd floor to create separate sleeping accommodation for the students and the teachers. Double bunks for the students, beds for the teachers, mattresses arriving on time, and the big teaching room on the ground floor as well as the upstairs rooms were provided with new fans and lights. Later, there were chairs and tables and 2 large specially constructed floor looms and spinning wheels to prepare threads for weaving. In the few days before the opening, there was the first get-together with the 3 extra teachers Chanti had lined up to make the team of 4, 2 weavers and 2 embroiderers.
Mary Nguyen from Pujong village would be the head teacher. A dozen or so women applied to be students on the first course, due to start on September the 3rd, but only 8 could be selected. The others went on to a waiting list for the next semester. 2 days later, we met the students. The women are all from farming families, aged between 18 and 34, and all except one are married with children. They want to learn weaving and embroidery as a means of eventually providing themselves with an extra livelihood. They formed themselves into 2 groups, one of which would study embroidery for 8 weeks, the other weaving, swapping roles halfway through the semester.
Time to put up the kangaroo sign, made by Tweed Shire Council in Australia, telling any interested passers-by in Lao and English what the centre was all about. Then visiting Australian student architect Emma Somerville, who's doing her master's thesis designing a purpose-built women's textile centre for the Women's Business Project, helped out in the Luang Prabang market, selecting a couple of dozen pink T-shirts, which were later printed on the back with women's business promos in both Lao and English. Getting ready for the opening, the women all wanted to wear their new T-shirts and sat themselves down all ready to listen to the opening speeches from the Deputy Director of the Department of Information, Tourism and Culture and the Deputy District Administrator and then Trish.
I want to thank you all for coming and for continuing the work you're doing. We want it to develop and grow. And I'm very proud of you. Thank you.
After which, as with previous Lao ventures, the project shouted everyone to lunch, which in itself produced some unexpected entertainment from the aforementioned government officials who broke into some strident karaoke versions of popular Lao and Thai pop songs. After lunch, it was down to business, with the weaving students spinning cotton off onto bobbins. The teachers decided to leave the setting up of the big looms until the cotton was spun, so as to teach the students all the steps with the looms from the start. Then the cotton from 20 bobbins is wound over and over a series of nails, hammered into posts at the front of the building, until together they form the 1,600 warped threads ready to be installed in the loom.
Meanwhile, Merenwin and co-teacher Bin are straight into the embroidery with their 4 students. Merenwin uses one of her classic Yao patterns to serve as a guide for the women to copy, using the heaps of colourful cotton thread sent to us through the post by scores of women in Australia. Local passers-by found the whole scene fascinating.
Setting up the big floor looms is quite a process. There are 3 main sections of threads. The black warp threads, 1,600 of them, along the length of the loom. The white heddle threads, which are vertical strings tied to the warp strings at 2 heddle rods and held vertically above the warp. Each black warp thread has to be tied individually to a white heddle thread. But once that's done, the process shifts up a gear. The heddle threads are controlled by foot pedals, which open a gap in the warp threads so that a wooden shuttle containing 2 bobbins of weft thread of a different colour can be slid from one side to the other. The other foot pedal then opens an alternate gap in the warp thread so the shuttle can be slid back to the original side. Then the beater, a piece of wood with 1,600 nylon or metal slots separating each of the warp threads, is pulled sharply back to firmly beat the weft threads into place. Then the whole process is repeated over and over to create the fabric. The students are quick to take their first steps in the weaving process under the watchful eyes of teachers Leah and Noi. Preparing to leave for home, it occurred to Trish to leave the women at the school with an experimental project, something that might provide an example of a saleable piece of fashion wear that could have some appeal outside of Laos, whether in Australia, Europe or the US.
We brought them a plain sleeve shrug of indigo dyed double cotton made by the Katu weaving sisters in Luang Prabang, and suggested to the students and teachers that they might like to adorn the plain shrug with examples of their own weaving and embroidery as borders and edging for the sleeves and back, as well as perhaps an embroidered design for the middle of the back.
It was suggested it could be done during a course of the semester if they felt like trying. Not only did they embrace the idea with enthusiasm, but within a short time produced a beautiful sample of what could be done. Steps are now underway to expand on their work with other ideas of theirs, and also to explore possible outlets in Australia and elsewhere. In addition, the head of the Department of Information, Culture and Tourism, Mr. Sang, who's been enthusiastic about the project from the start, has said that if the school is a success over the next couple of years, the department would consider granting a piece of land in the district centre for a permanent school of textile arts.
And back in Australia, we were able to see some of Emma Somerville's impressive preparatory work and plans for her master's thesis on the design of a school that could be built on the existing block of land the Lao local government could make available. It's near to our present school. In a preliminary assessment meeting at Bond University in southern Queensland, she presented her work to her professor, Mick Kenniger, and her tutor, Justin Toohill. She'll know the results of her work by the end of the year. And so we began to think that it could all become a reality.
And then there's Trisha's grand plan of 3 or 4 such centres in other parts of Laos. Luang Namta province in the north, Sam Nua in the east, and Sekong in the south. But these, she says, are scheme and dream items. So while this story of the Women's Business School of Textile Arts is an unfinished one, with lots of future possibilities, it could still just as easily fall by the wayside because of the need for ongoing support. There's no denying the quality and beauty of the fabrics created here and throughout Laos by women of all ethnicities. The need to preserve these traditional arts is vital. This has been one small step.